What's up, everybody? Welcome back, Corey Hughes Bloody History. So today we're going to go over some FBI documents. Over a span of time, the first one's dated May 18th, 1964, and these are all going to pertain to investigations that they did into Oswald's trip to Mexico City. But we all know that Oswald never went to Mexico City. It was Kerry Thornley who went to Mexico City. We also know that the entire Mexico City station was in on this cover-up, because if not, they are genuinely the most fucking incompetent people that have ever lived, and they're a disgrace to the Central Intelligence Agency. But we all know that's not the case. They were all in on this because they all just happen to be, they all have plausible deniability, right? They were all able to say, oh, well, it wasn't my responsibility, this it was over here, right? And they were able to shift, and nobody knew anything about anything. 5-6 visits to 2 different embassies that they were both spying on, and they never got a fucking photo of Oswald. Give me a break. The whole thing's ridiculous. So, and remember, we're going to talk about FBI documents today, and the FBI's number one job is to cover for the CIA. That's it. That's their number one job, right? So you can't trust anything, but of course they're going to give us way too many details, because that's how they are. They always tell us way too much. They give us more than enough to be able to investigate. And, all right, so let's get started. First one's dated May 18th, 64. The overall heading is labeled as Lee Harvey Oswald. This is a collection of reports, but it does pertain all to Mexico City. All right, introduction. That portion of the information recorded herein relating to the inquiries in Mexico was furnished by confidential sources abroad who, subsequent to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, were requested to conduct investigation designed to help develop all aspects of the activity of Lee Harvey Oswald in Mexico. Let me sum that up for you, buddy. There were none. Travel to Mexico by Lee Harvey Oswald, September 26th and 27th. Oswald's application for United States passport, June 24th, 1963. United States Department records disclosed it on June 24th, 1963. Oswald applied for a United States passport at New Orleans, Louisiana, stating that he intended to depart from New Orleans during the period from October to December 1963. For proposed travel as a tourist of 3 months to a year's duration to England, France, Germany, Holland, Russia, Finland, Italy, and Portugal. He was issued United States passport number DO92526 at New Orleans on June 25th, 1963. This passport was valid for 3 years for travel to all countries except Albania, Cuba, and those portions of China, Korea, and Vietnam under communist control. That's interesting. Why isn't the Soviet Union on that list? This passport was found among Oswald's effects following his arrest at Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. Oswald's Mexican tourist visa. On November 23rd, 1963, T1, a confidential source abroad, advised that the official records of the Mexican government reflected that one Lee Harvey Oswald had entered Mexico on September 26, 1963, at Nuevo Laredo, Tamaulipas, and had departed Mexico at the same place on October 3rd, 1963. On November 24th, 1963, sources made available a copy of the Mexican Form FM8 tourist card used for the entry of this person into Mexico. The FM8 is reproduced on the following page. The FM8 bears number 24085 and was issued on September 17, 1963 by the American Consulate General in New Orleans, Louisiana. As noted above, it was issued in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. It would appear that the comma was placed on the card in error, inasmuch as the signature appearing on the original and duplicate portions of the FM8 is Lee H. Oswald. Oswald listed his profession as photographer, stated that he was 23 years of age and married, and presented a birth certificate as proof of his citizenship. The FM8 was valid for a single journey to Mexico for a period of 15 days. According to the rubber stamp impression appearing on both the original and duplicate copy of the FM8, Oswald was admitted at Nuevo Laredo on September 26, 1963 by Mexican Immigration Services employee Helio Twexi Maydon. A rubber stamp impression on the original of the FM8 indicated that he departed Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on October 3, 1963. his departure having been handled by Mexican Immigration Services employee Alberto Arzamendi Chapa. By way of general information, T1 has stated that Mexican tourist cards are issued in duplicate. The duplicate copy of the card is picked up at the time of entry into Mexico of the bearer of the card. The latter retains the original of the card until departure from Mexico, at which time the original is picked up at the port of departure. Both the original and the duplicate copies of the card are date-stamped at the port of entry, and in addition, the original is date-stamped at the port of departure. Reproduced above is the original portion of the Mexican FM-8, which Lee Harvey Oswald entered Mexico on September 26, 1963, and departed therefrom on October 3, 1963. Although he is known to have traveled by bus from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, his mode of travel is not recorded on the FM-8, which was retrieved and canceled by Alberto Arzamendi Chapa at the time of his departure. No space is provided on the card for recording means of travel upon departure, and no such information appears on the above card. The back of the FM-8 contains no information other than printed instructions and warnings to the traveler in Spanish, English, and French. They have here a picture of it. It said it was issued on the 17th. That would have been the incident at the consulate that we've already talked about before when he picked it up, and so did David Pierce Magyar, and so did William Gaudet, all on the same day, right? So, on November 27th, 1963, Father Antonio Moreno, Sacred Heart Catholic Church, 215 North 16th Street, Edinburgh, Texas, advised in Edinburgh, Texas, that Father Richard Lawrence Filion, Philion, who formerly resided at this address, obtained a Mexican tourist card on about September 17th, 1963, to which he entered Mexico. He added that Father Richard Lawrence Filion is now assigned to the Santa Maria Magdalena Church in Texaquistlan, Oaxaca, Mexico, and that his mailing address is blah, 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 Mexico. T2, a confidential source abroad, advised that Father Filion stated at Salina Cruz, Oaxaca, Mexico, on December 13, 1963, that he had obtained his Mexican tourist card from form FM5 number 4373765 at the Mexican consulate in New Orleans on September 17, 1963. Father Filion examined various photographs of Oswald, and he could not recall any person of Oswald's description being present at the Mexican consulate in New Orleans when he obtained his Mexican tourist card. Father Filion advised that it was his best recollection that he was in the Mexican consulate in New Orleans about 1:30 p.m. on September 17, 1963, and that he arrived shortly before the Mexican consulate was scheduled to close. He recalled that his tourist card was the last one issued on the day of September 17th, and that one man and a woman were present at the Mexican consulate when he was securing his tourist card. He did not recall any individual resembling Oswald while he was at the Mexican consulate in New Orleans. Result of FBI laboratory examination of Oswald's tourist card. Mexican tourist card FM8 number 24085, issued on September 17, 1963 by the Mexican Consulate General in New Orleans, Louisiana, was forwarded to the FBI laboratory, Washington, D.C. for examination, and on December 6, 1963, the FBI laboratory concluded the following. After examination of the tourist card issued to Oswald, quote, it was concluded that handwritten Oswald signatures on the two portions of the tourist card, FM8, number 24085, issued to Oswald by the Mexican Consulate General, New Orleans, Louisiana, on September 17th, were written by Lee Harvey Oswald. No latent fingerprint impressions of value were developed on Oswald's Mexican tourist card. Closing of the U.S.-Mexican border. Immediately upon receipt of information of the assassination of President Kennedy, the Mexican government closed all border traffic between the United States and Mexico for the specific purpose of forestalling the escape of the assassin. The Mexican border was reopened following the apprehension of Oswald. Mexican newspaper Excelsior, November 25th, 1963, issue re Oswald's trip to Mexico. On November 25th, 1963, Mexican newspaper Excelsior, published at Mexico DF Mexico, contained a page 1A, an article in the Spanish language, a translation of which is as follows. The apparent assassin of Kennedy solicited visas here in Mexico in order to go to Moscow via Havana. Lee Harvey Oswald, alleged murderer of President Kennedy and who was assassinated by Jack Rubenstein, entered Mexico on September 26th. last with a tourist card, which our consul in New Orleans issued him on the 17th of the same month, with his birth certificate, which he presented accrediting him as an American citizen. Excelsior has confirmed that on September 26, 1963, he crossed the border at Nuevo Laredo, and the following day arrived at this capital by vehicle highway. According to inquiries made on the same September 27th, Oswald went to the Consul General of Cuba in Mexico in order to obtain a transit visa because he was thinking of traveling to Moscow via Havana. The consul, Eusebio Azcue, indicated to him that in order to issue him the visa, which was soliciting, he had to consult directly with his own government. The operation, therefore, would require from 10 to 12 days. Lee Harvey Oswald, because of his irritable temperament, had an argument with Consul Azcue and departed from his office, giving a hard slam to the door as he left. On the following day, or on the 28th of September, Oswald interviewed the Consul General of the Soviet Union accredited in Mexico in order to solicit his corresponding visa for entry into the USSR. He supported his petition with the fact that his wife was a Soviet citizen, that he was a militant communist, and that he had lived for 3 years in Russia. Oswald told the consul of the Soviet Union in Mexico that they could easily verify his words by communicating telephonically with his wife, who could be found lodging in a hotel in New Orleans. Following the normal procedure carried out in these cases, the Soviet consul indicated to him that he would first have to consult with his own government, and that the lapse of time for obtaining an answer was from 3 to 4 months. Okay, so let's back up just a second here. Oswald told the consul of the Soviet Union in Mexico that they could easily verify his words by communicating telephonically with his wife, who could be found lodging in a hotel in New Orleans. No. That's false. Marina Oswald was picked up by Ruth Payne at their residence. I believe was it Magazine Street? But she picked them up from that residence. So I don't know what he's talking about. Could be found in a hotel. That's apparently what he told Mr. Azcue. Continuing on, the apparent murderer of President Kennedy again became angry and repeated the scene which he had made the day before at the Cuban embassy, arguing with the Soviet consul and departing highly disgusted from his office. Oswald returned to Texas on the 3rd day of October through the border at Nuevo Laredo. The inquiries which have been made to the present in Mexico apparently indicate that Lee Harvey Oswald had no interviews with highly placed officials at the Soviet embassy or at the Cuban embassy accredited to our government. Checks made on Compagnie d'Aviation passenger manifests for September 26, 27, 1963. T3, a confidential source abroad, advised that on November 25, 63, Fernando Farias, assistant sales manager for Compañía Mexicana de Aviación, Balderas, Mexico, stated that he had caused a careful check to be made of all CMA passenger manifests for CMA flights between Nuevo Laredo and Mexico DF for all CMA flights between Monterrey and Mexico DF for September 26th and 27th. Fernando Farias stated that there were no passengers listed on these manifests using the name Lee Harvey Oswald or any name variation thereof. Check at Oswald's port of entry into Mexico. On November 25th, 1963, Helio Tuxi Maydon, Mexican Immigration Service employee, advised at Nuevo Laredo that Oswald entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on September 26th using a 15-day tourist card issued September 17th, 1963 by the Mexican Consulate General at New Orleans, Louisiana. Tuexi Maydon had no independent recollection of Oswald. That's spelled Tuexi, by the way, but considered that Oswald may have been in the company of a young American couple. An exhaustive search was made of the Mexican immigration records at Nuevo Laredo, which disclosed that there was only one young American couple whose entry into Mexico may have coincided with that of Oswald, a couple named Bill and Elaine Allen of Miami, Florida. On November 27, 1963, Maidan advised that no information had been developed regarding the exact time or specific mode of travel of Oswald at the time he entered Mexico. He stated that Oswald's entry into Mexico on September 26 took place between 6 a.m. and 2 p.m., and that he had handled Oswald's entry and he worked this shift at the border port of entry at Nuevo Laredo. He added that Oswald's departure from Mexico was at Nuevo Laredo on October 3rd between 12 a.m. and 8 a.m., and that this shift was supervised by Alberto Arzamendi Chapa, Mexican Immigration Service employee. On November 27, 63, Mario del Val Plata, Mexican Immigration Service employee at Nuevo Laredo, advised that no Mexican Immigration Service employee who was on duty at Nuevo Laredo when Oswald entered or departed from Mexico had any independent recollection of Oswald by photograph or otherwise with regard to his entry or departure from Mexico. Check of Flecha Roja, baggage list for passengers for September 26, 63, trip from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico DF. I'm assuming Mexico DF is Mexico City. The baggage list for passengers for September 26, 63 of the Mexican bus line Flecha Roja for the bus which left Nuevo Laredo at 2 p.m. on the same date reflects that there was a total of 18 pieces of baggage. The baggage list reflects the following: Pablo Vasquez, a second piece of luggage of Pablo Vasquez, S. Moreau, Alfredo Briseno, Rog, Sorquiz, T. Gonzalez, Andre Morales, second piece of luggage to Andre Morales, GPE Martinez, first name unknown Bowen. That's the big one right there. Bowen is the CIA agent. I'll have to, what's his name? Was it Alfred Bowen or Al Bowen? Something, I forget his name offhand. Guys, let's pull everything on Mr. Bowen. You guys know who I'm talking about. Harry J. Mitchell, second piece and third piece to Harry J. Mitchell. Then a Lee H. Oswald with a J. Oswald. And then first name unknown Bowen again, believed to be identical with John H. Bowen. Second piece of luggage attributed to Bowen. John McFarland. Second piece of luggage attributed to John McFarland. And the driver of the bus was listed as Roberto Morales. Baggage list has number 18 at the bottom, which according to the Mexico City terminal manager, Flecha Rojas, signifies that 18 pieces of luggage had been checked and ticketed on that bus. T4, a confidential source abroad, advised on December 16th that Roberto Morales, driver of Flecha Roja bus number 516, on September 26, 1963, could not recall the passengers on the trip of September 26th because so much of the time had elapsed. And since he makes 2 round trips between Nuevo Laredo each week, he could not recall any information regarding Oswald or any other passengers on the bus. John H. Bowen was identified from Mexican immigration records as a 60 years of age, born Houston, Texas, a United States citizen, residence Houston, Texas. Mexican tourist card was issued to him at Nuevo Laredo on September 26, 1963, upon presentation of his birth certificate. Harry J. Mitchell was identified as 41 years of age, U.S. citizen, lawyer, residence in Palmyra, Missouri. Mexican tourist card issued to him at Nuevo Laredo on September 26th. Annie Marie Mitchell was identified as apparently being the wife of Harry J. Mitchell, above 22 years of age, U.S. citizen, same residence. John Brian McFarland and his wife, Mrs. Anna Merle Reed McFarland, 10 Fulwood Park, Liverpool, England, were interviewed in England and advised they were on the Flecha Roja bus from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico DF, September 26, 27. They stated that they observed the following during this trip. Oswald was on this bus trip traveling alone, and he sat next to an 80-year-old man described as a United States citizen who appeared to be 60 years of age and resides in Cuernavaca, state of Morelos, Mexico, and in the state of Tennessee in the United States. This individual was identified further as a school teacher who taught in India and Arabia and currently was writing a book on the Lisbon, Portugal earthquake of 1775. During this trip, Oswald spoke to 2 Australian girls in their mid-20s who boarded this bus in Monterey. And these 2 girls got off at Mexico DF. Oswald left the bus alone at Mexico DF. With regards to the first individual described by the McFarlands, John Howard Bowen, listed above with tourist card FM5 number 4329926, was considered possibly to be the elderly United States citizen who sat next to Oswald, and he could be contacted in care of Calle Carranza, number 4A, San Martin. Extensive investigation to locate John Howard Bowen was made, and the results are set forth hereinafter. With regard to the two Australian girls in their mid-20s, these girls were considered identical with Patricia Claire Roseley Winston, 22 years of age, Australian citizen, native of the Fiji Islands, bearer of Mexican tourist card FM5, number 4225835, issued August 24th, 63, by the Mexican consulate in New York, home address listed as 222 West 23rd Street, and Pamela Lillian Mumford, 21 years of age, English citizen, born in the Fiji Islands, bearer of Mexican tourist card FM5, number 4225836, issued the same date and place as that of Winston. According to Mexican immigration records, Winston and Mumford entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo, September 25th, 63, one day before Oswald entered Mexico. Patricia Winston and Pamela Mumford advised the following on December 17, 63, when interviewed in the United States. Winston and Mumford boarded a bus at Monterrey State of Nuevo Leon, Mexico on September 26, 1963 at 7:30 p.m. En route to Mexico DF, both identified Oswald as a passenger on this bus, and both observed him sitting next to an Englishman who had lived in Mexico for 30 years. This latter individual was described as being in his late 60s, heavy build, gray hair, balding with a distinctive English accent, and both believed him to be retired from business. Winston and Mumford recalled that Oswald introduced himself and exhibited to them his United States passport. Oswald advised Winston and Mumford that he had lived in Russia for 2 years and that he had a hard time getting out of Russia. Oswald stated he had been in Japan. Oswald made no comment concerning communism or Cuba. He did not state why he was traveling to Mexico, where he was going, and he did not advise concerning his occupation or future plans. Oswald stated that he was from Fort Worth or Dallas, Texas. He was observed to be traveling alone. He had only one piece of luggage and a small zipper bag. He wore a gold medal ring. Oswald recommended that Winston and Mumford stay at the Hotel Cuba, Mexico DF, where he claimed that he had stayed several times before. He pointed out this hotel was inexpensive, but that he was not staying at the Hotel Cuba on this trip. Okay, hang on. I caught something here. He'd stayed at this place several times before, right? But Oswald had never been to Mexico City before, right? Kerry Thornley had been there at least 2 times previous, in May and in August. Now here he is going again at the end of September. 3rd time for Kerry Thornley. There's no way that Oswald would have ever said that he had stayed there before, because he fucking never did. Kerry Thornley did. Winston and Mumford recalled an English couple aboard the bus. This couple is considered identical with Mr. John Bryan McFarland and wife Anna Merle Reed McFarland, mentioned above. John Howard Bowen, who has been known as Reverend Albert Osborne and has resided at Cal Emilio Carranza. Okay, hold on a second. I'm fucking laughing here because this is an FBI report, all right? And how the fuck do you justify the fact that somebody's got an alias? Right? Let's see what else they have to say about Mr. Bowen. I might be jumping the gun here, but they're not going to out him as a CIA agent, obviously. John Howard Bowen, who's been known as Reverend Albert Osborne, has been resided at Calle Emilio Carranza, number 4A, San Martin, state of Puebla, Mexico, and 4114 Drummond Street, Montreal, Canada. Was determined to be the holder of the Canadian passport 5605377. T2 advised on January 7th, 64, that Bowen, while posing as Reverend Albert Osborne, stated in Mexico that he was acquainted with Reverend John Howard Bowen and furnished misleading information concerning the alleged whereabouts of Bowen. I'm going to screenshot that because that reeks of importance, doesn't it? On January 28th, 64, T5, a confidential source who has furnished reliable information in the past, advised the records of the Mexican Ministry of Gobernación, Ministry of the Interior, reflect that Albert Osborne was deported from Mexico on April 5th, 1958 through Laredo, Texas. Osborne had been charged with selling an automobile in the Oaxaca, Mexico area without paying the import duties. These records reflected also in 58, Osborne was known as John Howard Bowen and was located in Mexico and determined to be without proper Mexican immigration papers. On January 30th, 1964, T6, a confidential source abroad, advised that inasmuch as Albert Osborne had been illegally in Mexico, he would be detained for deportation if located in Mexico. Bowen was interviewed at Florence, Alabama on February 8, 1964, and advised that he recalled making a bus trip from Nuevo Laredo, Mexico to Mexico DF on September 26, 27, 1963, and sitting next to a young man who he described as 29 years of age, 5 foot 8 inches tall, 150 pounds in weight, with thin blonde hair and a dark complexion, who appeared to be of Mexican or Puerto Rican descent. This individual went to sleep soon after boarding the bus, and after a lunch stop at Sabinas, Hidalgo, Mexico, this person moved to the back of the bus where he reclined on a seat and went to sleep. Bowen claimed that he did not talk to the above person and was unable to identify press photos of Oswald. Bowen stated that he is acquainted with an Albert Osborne, described as a Baptist preacher or missionary from Canada, and while in Oaxaca, Mexico in 1958. Bowen misplaced his identification papers, and during a census taken at Oaxaca, he borrowed Osborne's identification papers. Bowen claimed he had never before or afterward used the name of Osborne. Give me a fucking break. Interviewed further at Nashville, Tennessee on March 3, 1964, Osborne admitted that he had used dual identities as Osborne and John H. Bowen for many years in Mexico and the United States. He continued to deny any knowledge of Oswald, however. You seriously just can't fucking make this stuff up, right? All right, list of. I'm sorry I'm laughing, but this is just so fucking funny to me. Oh my God. List obtained of entry of all non-Mexican citizens on September 26, 1963 at Nuevo Laredo. T1, who was thoroughly familiar. I'm sorry, it's just so goddamn funny. I'm still laughing. It's fucking obviously CIA bullshit. Nobody else uses aliases except the CIA. And people avoiding child support or some bullshit like that. T1, who is thoroughly familiar with the workings of the Mexican Ministry of Gobernación Interior, furnished the following information concerning the procedures utilized by the Mexican Immigration Service in connection with the entry and departure of non-Mexican citizens into and out of Mexico. It is to be noted that the Mexican Immigration Service is a part of the Mexican Ministry of Gobernación. Tourists usually enter Mexico on a Mexican tourist card. There are two types of such cards, one being called the FM8, which is valid for a stay in the country of only 15 days, and one is designated FM5, which has a validity for 180 days stay in Mexico. Both types are issued at Mexican consulates throughout the world and can also be obtained from the Mexican Immigration Service at border ports of entry. FM8 tourist cards are also available at airline ticket offices and tourist agencies. At the time of entry into Mexico, the traveler surrenders the duplicate portion of the tourist card, and both the duplicate and the original, which remains in the possession of the traveler, are stamped with a rubber stamp which shows the name of the Mexican representative handling the entry, the date of entry, and the locality of the port of entry. When the traveler leaves Mexico, he surrenders the original portion of the tourist card, and it is stamped with a rubber stamp which carries the name of the Mexican representative, the date of the departure, and the locality of the port of departure. Each Mexican port of entry is required on a continuing basis and to prepare a form called the FM11. The FM11 for both entries and departures is prepared each quincena, 15-day period. Entries and departures are set up on the FM11 in chronological order, and thereafter, within each date, the names of the tourists are listed in alphabetical order. Basic information appearing on the FM11 is taken from the tourist card presented by the traveler. At the time the FM11 is prepared, a number is placed on the tourist card. These numbers being in sequence according to the alphabetical order of the names within each date and thereafter by date. By way of example, the first traveler in alphabetical order entering at a port of entry on the first day of the month or a quincena is assigned number 1. Thereafter, all travelers entering that port on that date are assigned numbers in sequence according to alphabetical order. This sequence continues on the second day of the month and throughout the remaining 15 days of the quincena. T1 made available for examination the forms FM5 and FM8 for all non-Mexican citizens entering Mexico at Nuevo Laredo as tourists on September 26, 1963, as well as the copies of forms FM11 containing the recapitulation of the entries to Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on this date. From the tourist cards FM5 and FM8 and the copies of the forms FM11, the following summary of information concerning each person who entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on September 26, 1963 had been obtained. The summaries have been divided into those persons traveling on form FM5 and those traveling on form FM8. Since the forms FM11 are so set up, The number appearing before each name is the number which appears in the form FM11. The following is a brief resume regarding each person who entered Mexico on September 26, 1963. Information was available regarding the mode of transportation on entry. A brief description of the person, the residence listed, proof of citizenship was shown, and the Mexican Immigration Service employee who handled the entry, and this information was set out in detail in memorandums dated March 16, 64. All right. Looks like Margarita Alanis, FM5, number 432. I'm not going to read all that stuff. Jose Alfaro, FM5, issued by the Mexican consulate. All right. We have a whole bunch of names here. I'm just going to skim through it and see if anything jumps off the page. Norberto Avila, Winfred Barnes, John Bowen, that one we already talked about. Sarah Markella Yanis de Champour, Marjorie Fern Charles, Andrew Webster Christopher. That name is jumping off the page, but I don't know why. Samuel Estrada, Bernie Faber, Oscar Gallardo, Elise Gibbs. No, nothing else jumping off the page. All right, so T7, a confidential source abroad, advised that Solomon Bandek, residence 18652 Kelly Road, Detroit, Michigan, stated at Monterrey, Nuevo Leon, Mexico on December 11, 63, that he's retired jeweler and had traveled from Monterrey to Nuevo Laredo on September 26, 63 in his personally owned automobile. He again entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on September 26 and returned to Monterrey. He had no contact with Oswald, could furnish no information concerning him. T8, a confidential source abroad, advised that Andrew Webster Christopher, residence Lerdo de Tejada in Guadalajara, stated on December 16th that he entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on September 26 in his personally owned automobile. He was unable to identify any photos of Oswald. He stated he had not observed Oswald at the time he entered Mexico. T9, confidential source, who has provided reliable information in the past, advised December 13th that Carlos Almaguer Echarta, residence Calle, license Jose Correa Bocangrena, number 1105, Colonia Industrial, Monterrey, had stated that he and his wife entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo on September 26 in their personally owned automobile and that they had not heard anything about Oswald. Same thing about Guillermo Hevia Villar and Maria Otero Pablos. Entered on September 26th, did not see Oswald. Same thing with Harvey Tuttle, residence Calle 6, number 208 in Jalisco, Mexico. Stated on January 4th, he entered Mexico at Nuevo Laredo by bus on September 26th, which had the exact date, but he could not recall because he did not have in his immediate possession his tourist card. He could not recall anyone resembling Oswald at Nuevo Laredo or on the bus which he traveled. T10, confidential source abroad, advised Christopher Stanley Stemp, residence 7223 Jarnock Avenue in Hammond, Indiana, employed as a math teacher, American High School, San Salvador, El Salvador, stated in San Salvador, El Salvador, on January 14, 64, that he entered Mexico at the same place, September 26th. On the first bus which crossed the border on this date about 6 a.m., he traveled to Laredo, Texas by Greyhound bus from San Antonio, Texas, and boarded a Transporte del Norte bus in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. He traveled from Nuevo Laredo to Monterrey by bus, arriving in the latter place about noon. He took a train from Monterrey, state of San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and arriving at noon, September 28, 63, he could not identify Oswald. Interview of Roberto Morales, driver of Flecha Roja, bus number 516. Confidential source abroad advised as follows on March 14th, 64 that is, Roberto Morales, driver of Flecha Roja, bus 516 on September 26, 27. He could not recall specifically the trip that he made on September 26, 27 from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico City because he made numerous trips and seen a large number of passengers since that time. He was shown the baggage list, recording the names of some of the passengers on that trip, and stated that he is not acquainted with any of the names and does not know any of the persons listed. He was unable to identify Oswald John Howard Bowen, true name Albert Osborne. Morales stated that his co-driver from Monterrey, Mexico, is usually Alfredo Cervantes, who resides in Mexico City, address unknown. On May 14th, Alejandro Sosedo, manager of the Mexico City terminal of Services Unidos Autobuses Blancos Fresa Roja. That's the fucking long name of the company. Callejeros and Ferrocarrileros 45 provided the following information. The baggage list reflected it was prepared for bus number 516, which departed from Nuevo Laredo at 2 o'clock, driven by Roberto Morales. The number 18 encircled at the bottom of the list indicates 18 pieces of baggage were checked. Saucedo affirmed that the number of passengers departing on the bus from Nuevo Laredo is not specified on the baggage list, and that only persons who check and become responsible for one or more articles of baggage are listed thereon. He pointed out that unaccompanied baggage also may be sent in this manner, and the presence of a name on the baggage list does not ensure that the person actually traveled on the bus. Interview of Ernesto Hernandez, co-driver of Flecha Roja, Red Arrow bus number 516 from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico City. T12 confidential source abroad advised on April 21st, 64 that Ernesto Hernandez, co-driver of Flecha Roja bus number 516, he resides at Alameda number 4 in Mexico, and for the past 9 years he's been employed as a bus driver for the Flecha Roja bus company. He has no independent recollection of having been the co-driver of the bus 516 on 26/27. But when his recollection was refreshed, he stated that for the first and only time he had been the co-driver of Roberto Morales on bus number 516 on the trip from Nuevo Laredo to Mexico DF on September 26/27. He normally does not work as a co-driver with Morales, but did recall having substituted for Morales' regular partner, Alfredo Garcia Cervantes. He was unable to identify photographs of Oswald and John Howard Bowen. He could not associate Oswald with anyone he might have seen in the past. He had seen photographs of Oswald in the newspapers following the assassination of President Kennedy, but he did not associate Oswald with anyone he has seen. He was shown the baggage list for passengers for the above trip. He did not know any of the names on the list. He advised that it was difficult for him to distinguish one trip from another or to recall individual passengers in the absence of a particular incident which might have occurred on the trip. He could not recall the above-mentioned trip made by bus 516, the portions of the trip during which Morales had operated the bus, or between the points he, Hernandez, had driven the bus. He could not furnish any data to assist in identifying Oswald as being a passenger aboard Flecha Roja bus 516 on those dates. Oswald in Mexico City, New York Times newspaper account. The Western edition of the New York Times, dated December 3rd, 63, carried an article by correspondent Peter Kiss, which is reproduced here under and reports information purportedly gleaned by the correspondent in Mexico City. Oswald followed lonely path during recent visit to Mexico. Inquiry finds $30 could have covered all expenses of month-long trip. His travels are detailed by Peter Kiss, that's K-I-H-S-S, special to the New York Times. Mexico City, December 2nd. More lonely steps along the trail of Lee Harvey Oswald in the last autumn of his life came to light today. Evidence turned up concerning the trip that Oswald made here in late September and early October presented a picture consistent with that pertained to other periods in the life of the accused assassin of the president. The Mexican Ministry of the Interior disclosed that the results of its intensive police investigation had indicated that Oswald was alone here. The ministry's findings have been transmitted to the United States authorities. Indeed, a few mysteries remained as to Oswald's trip here. Following painstaking inquiry, the investigation disclosed that often impecunious Oswald could have financed his entire trip to Mexico, September 26th to October 23rd, with less than $30, thus apparently disposing of the question of where he could have obtained substantial funds for the trip. Newsmen identified the bus line on which Oswald traveled from Nuevo Laredo across the border to his capital and back. It was Transportes Frontera. At its office at Buena Vista Street, a clerk, Lucio Lopez, said the Mexican police had been given the list of passengers that run on the line keeps. Investigators were understood also to have checked a number of the guests who were at the Hotel Comercio, the hotel where Oswald stayed. He was the only American among a clientele composed mostly of Mexicans and few Cubans, the latter apparently exiles. The Cuban Foreign Ministry has confirmed that Oswald, while in Mexico City, sought a Cuban visa on September 27th as a transit traveler to the Soviet Union. The ministry said that when Oswald was told the consulate could not issue such a visa without Havana authorization, he left visibly displeased. The ministry also said such a visa would not be granted unless a visa had been previously issued by the country of destination. met delay on Soviet visa. The Mexican Interior Ministry said Oswald's effort later to get a Soviet visa had been met with a consular statement that there would have to be a delay. A Mexican official said Oswald told the Cubans and the Russians he was a communist who had lived for 2 years in the Soviet Union and married a Russian woman. The police investigation was reported to have no indication that Oswald had visited anyone else of political interest. Cuban exiles opposed to the regime of Premier Fidel Castro have been trying to check on Oswald's activity here. So far, they have not turned up anything of consequence. This is a sprawling city of nearly 5 million inhabitants, but even in this multitude, Oswald's tracks have been uncovered. Oswald took a 2:30 p.m. bus Thursday, September 26th from Nuevo Laredo for the 750-mile trip scheduled to end here Friday, September 27th at 8:30 p.m. The one-way fare on the Frontera line is $5.71 at the exchange rate of 12.5 Mexican pesos a dollar. There are at least 2 scores of what Mexicans call humble hotels within a radius of 5 blocks of the bus terminal. Oswald appears to have been fortunate to have found the well-kept comercio on a block-long Bernardo de Sahaguan street named for the Spanish colonial missionary who befriended the Indians. For 16 pesos a day, $1.28, he got a room number 18 with private bath in the 4-story glazed red brick building. Sebastian Perez Hernandez, desk clerk, said Oswald had arrived alone and left early in the morning and come back late at night. He had no visitors. The hotel proprietor, Guillermo Garcia, was shocked when investigators found Oswald's signature on the registry. Mr. Garcia admired President Kennedy as a friend of Mexico and a Roman Catholic. He never connected the name of his guest with the assassination. Oswald had one leather suitcase about 2 feet long. He wore short-sleeved shirts and talked only briefly with the night watchman and the chambermaid in Spanish. Oswald didn't speak Spanish. Next to the hotel at the lunchroom La Esperanza, Mrs. Dolores de Barrero, a widow who has run the neat eating place for 6 months, remembered having seen Oswald 3 or 4 days. She said he'd eaten there only once. A chop for 21 cents. He had a lunch steak and rice, which came to about 26 cents. The costliest item on the bill of fare is a chop cooked to his taste for 21 cents. Mrs. Barrero said Oswald's Spanish had been hard to understand and he had eaten alone in silence. Newsmen calculated that Oswald could have stayed within $3 for his meals in Mexico for 8 days. He paid $11.42 for bus fare, $6.40 for 5 days rent, and 50 cents for a special 15-day tourist card that he got in New Orleans. These figures add up to $25.32. On the same block with the hotel are a number of modest apartment houses. Across the way is a parking lot. At the end of the street is a typical little park with stone benches. The neighborhood is the Guerrero district, largely commercial. Oswald left Mexico City on Wednesday, October 2nd on a Frontera bus that was scheduled to depart at 1 p.m. and arrive at Nuevo Laredo on 6:30 a.m. Thursday, October 3rd. A Mexican Interior Minister official suggested Oswald might have spent most of his time here, which included a weekend as a tourist, perhaps also taking in some movies. It is believed Oswald left New Orleans on September 24th after having sent his wife to Dallas the previous day with a friend. He vanished from his cheap apartment there on that day without having paid his rent. He's believed to have hitchhiked to Laredo on the American side of the border. Oh, really? That's interesting. It was his custom to travel by hitchhiking wherever possible. That's fucking nonsense. Let me screenshot this. It was presumed that he probably hitchhiked north to Dallas from Laredo on his return from Mexico City. He arrived in Dallas the evening of October 3rd and checked into the Dallas YMCA. The distance from Laredo to Dallas is 475 miles. All right. So we are now up to Oswald's visits to Cuban and Soviet diplomatic establishments, investigation by Mexican authorities. And this is where we're going to start to get into Sylvia Duran, I believe. And so we're going to call it here for today. We're going to pick up here tomorrow. And guys, I got 50 books in. I got 50. Actually, I'm down to like 44. I got 44 books left. If you want one signed, they're $50 each. I can have it out to you tomorrow. So shoot me a message on Telegram or get a hold of me directly through email or something like that. That's the only way I'm selling the signed books. But I got them in stock. People have been asking about them, and now I have them. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. I'll be back tomorrow. And till then.